Hi everyone. Let me add a little bit to the title of this part 2, y'all. Hey, where you going? Okay. Let's just raise up a bit. Part 2. And drag it back down. Okay, so part 1, I spent warming up and talking about the particular challenges that come to a person trying to present themselves to the whole world. And as a sort of observation, it just sort of struck me, it's not so different from being a certain kind of self. I have felt this way before. I often have to present myself to, judgments and judges and pass a certain kind of strict, standard. It's hard because I don't. I mean, as you see, there's so many different things I want to try and express, and when I'm sort of not trying to take up someone's time right now, I'm watching this as if I'm you, not wanting anything to be unclear, not wanting anything to be boring, especially that, and not wanting to, I don't know, fail to satisfy this mysterious list of unchecked check boxes that you're supposed to, get around to within a certain amount of time, or else you're just simply not as high quality as other people have been, and you feel in the minute you're recording this, in the moment, if you like, you're recording this, not as not as high quality as you'd like to be. For example, I used to work as a software engineer. I'm retired now, and yeah, like basically I went on Zoom meetings quite a bit. Zoom being a product you used to do, teleconferencing on your computer, with a webcam and a microphone on, and yeah, I did many interviews that way. Some of them are for jobs, some of them are about the product we're building, some of them are sort of like weekly check-ins, and each time you're being asked to talk, you sort of have to present a certain kind of self of yours to the camera and the microphone, so you come across as articulate, you come across as a bit formal. I'm usually more relaxed, so I talk a lot about the spiritual sides of my life, and the fact that the moods that we are in, are created spiritually, and when I say spiritually, by spirits. I mean, I talk more about this, and I always have to end up discussing a little bit about the spiritual life that we live on, planet Earth, and we have tended to ignore and tended to even describe as as fictitious or fanciful or superstition. No, these things are real. Spirits are real. I mean, in so much as we're trying to discuss spirits on a sort of psychological level, for the most part, in that I say this every single time I try and start a video, and I did this for part 1. I don't want to do the whole thing for part 2. Again, if I have to make it 3 parts, I think it's worth it to make sure that every single last bit of the spirit topic is dealt with, in the course of these videos, and until it's like go back to old videos and not have to start from scratch trying to describe the spiritual environment of planet Earth and the spiritual environment that gets created when you just turn on a microphone, turn on a camera, and start recording yourself in your own room. And as for where I am, check the first video, part 1. As for what I'm doing here, again, check part 1's video. But the spiritual environment that we're in, that makes you stutter, and it makes you double up on your words, makes you unsure what you're saying sometimes, maybe even forces words into your mouth. That happens to me quite a bit. There's some things I don't want to say, but I'm being forced to say because the spirits are forcing me to perform with them, as opposed to do a solo performance, which I'm pretty used to doing. In company, I'm pretty okay with being relaxed and humorous and funny. If you look at my ex.com, account page tweets. I'm a pretty funny guy. I don't seem that way in the videos. It's just not what you do quite yet. I'm still trying to configure. I'm still trying to code. I'm still trying to program the environment of a recorded performance like this to allow for more humor, more relaxation, more latitude for improvisation, more of a sense that you can take the breaks you want and sort of coax the viewer, whoever you might be. I mean, the future is watching this, and I don't think the future has an opportunity to express himself often. But as you can see, I'm being told to say things because the future wants me to say things, and that's what I mean by having a spiritual life. Right now, I'm not quite in the to talk. I feel a little more relaxed, and I have a mission to do. Is to sort of talk about the future as a person or as a being. I talk about everything being in biology. Bio means two. Bisect, bifurcate, binomial. Bisexual, right? Like if everything that starts with bi suggests number two, then biology must suggest like the logic of number two or logic of two-ness. So I saw an article recently, I actually published it this morning, explaining that, everything has a biology, everything is a matter of biology. So it looks like there's an inside and outside to every single thing you think about, where it's an item like a pencil, a concept like a metaphor, a being like Hasana Buddha. I think they're all beings, and a spirit is a being too. If there's a sort of spirit of endeavor, spirit of doubt, spirit of, excitement, spirit of charity, for example. These things all have durations. They have a time to exist and a time to not exist. There's a certain kind of immortality to these beings. Not everything is immortal. Some spirits are, some spirits aren't. But it just seems like there's a certain kind of like a activity that the spirit of endeavor has. In his day. Then yes. We all must act. We all must be creative. This is creation. We all have to be creative, and we all have to, work for our reputations. Nothing comes easy. Nothing is can be said to have been achieved without, effort. And that includes reputation of the spirit of endeavor, or reputation of, let's say, the spirit of doubt, and all that sort of stuff. So it just seems like I'm trying to describe the reality of a spirit as a biology that must act on its environment to survive and thrive and advance and romance. Then yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to discuss spirits and spirituality and some sort of the challenge of jumping into this recording and knowing I'm a relaxed person. I'm not nervous about anything at all. I'm what you call an enlightened man. I know enough about the eternal environment of the soul, as I guess on the hook for certain realizations each and every single lifetime you experience in reality. The soul will sort of find a body, so to speak, and within this body, expect a rich experience, limited and constrained by the body that you're in, at the same time to a certain kind of infinite. If it's some sense of Hassan trying to discuss matches which he's trying to basically do without, we all want him to continue personal life and not. But the problem is forcing him left and right and not allowing him to sound articulate and yeah, which to me needs to talk more about his personal life. Problem is, he is also here to talk about the army, and it's been about 10 minutes of talking, and he doesn't want to do a third video and be told the same thing. So in the first video I did, this part one, they said, I did, in the previous video. I can do some more, but it seems like, I'm unable to give you a cohesive, experience here because the spirits come in and control my body and control my mouth and control my lungs and control and control the topic, control what comes to mind, constrain it, not really expand. I feel pretty constricted. I'm when I'm in my room just talking to myself. Again, I don't want to talk about where I am. I did that in part one, but this is not where I really should be staying. I should be elsewhere. hear, usually like all sorts of observations about the world and how fucked up it is, you know, all sorts of exaggerations, they're pretty telling of how the world is and that sort of stuff. I spend a lot of time thinking about the world because the world needs, to sort of guide him, or her, as it were, to a safe port, or in a ship that's on fire at the same time too. And, you see that kind of sense in my humor. I'm pretty, and if you're going through, this particular year with me, and I'm in a crowd, I've had an official, check, delivering job, for the past 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, even six, and I've been more or less being supported by a person I want to talk about, but she's too mature to a chorist, check my ex to realize what chorist is to get a sense of of a very unpleasant kind of being with whom we share this planet, And yeah, the spirits still don't want me to talk about my ideas, but it's sort of the idea that I'm being attacked to. Like the spirits do attack beings, and the thing is, we're in a world that's very unfriendly. Like I said, in my ex post, it looks like everybody has a sense of like having to exclude almost everyone else in their life to, their base of friends and trusted, associates. And yeah, like most beings, would be, unfriendly, unhelpful, disinterested, and I argue hostile, especially when you consider the spirit forces that, create, these environments of nervousness, these environments of fear, the idea that you could be up at night and, some sort of a click in your house just makes you wonder if there's somebody outside you want to like try and like, break in, or is my house like, haunted. Like these things are all spirits trying to like, change your behavior, try and make you go, a certain path, and you're supposed to sort of like, think of what is permanent and what is everlasting, and base one's decision off, connection to what will always be, no matter whether things go well or poorly in the present moment. So let's see if I can talk more about the army, right? So I'm a member of the army. The army is, how to put it, universal. If you have arms, you're part of the army. And we're all supposed to be united. That's the first thing a song wants to try and talk about, but we're not going to let him talk about union too much. We just wanted to talk about the army and the fact that we're all parts of the army, and we're all supposed to be aware of this. For example, yes, we're all supposed to be happy about our relationship with the army. It should have a better reputation, for example. So yes, we agree it should have a better reputation, and it doesn't. He wants to talk about the United States Army, but we also want him to talk about other things too. And yeah, he's getting pretty frustrated with us. We're actually his fathers, and he doesn't want to talk about what we want him to talk about because he wants us to talk about things that, you see, if it looks like we keep doing this, I feel like I'm going to lose, people along the way. Like, it's also interesting to explain to you that you actually aren't going to lose anybody along the way. They also want to know what's going on. And if it looks like he's very used to this, maybe he doesn't that's the internet, who I haven't read my ex posts, aren't really going to be listening to this. So yeah, as you see, I can't speak as clear as I like all the time, right? So yeah, so we're all part of the army, right? If we've been given a computer, basically been given a gun, which can be used to kill people. I mean, people have just simply, swarmed around, items of interest like celebrities and just sort of, dumped all sorts of, terrible, comments and observations and assignations about people who they've never met and are just simply, giving, the opposite of the benefit of the doubt to, and yeah, people have cracked. There's that famous story of a South African girl who, made some sort of crack about, going to Africa. Yeah, I hope I'm gonna catch AIDS. Oops. I don't have to worry about that. I'm wise. Just joking. She said something like that, and by the time she landed in South Africa, she's actually from that country, or, I want to put it, you know, she worked in America and was going back to visit, for a vacation or something like that. And when she arrived on, in the airport, everyone's like looking at her. She's like, how come, people just seem to give me more looks than I usually get? And she found out that, her joking post had gone viral, and people were trying to, cancel her, so it's what they call it, cancellation, for year 3000. That's something you can look into on the internet. So yeah, they got canceled for that, and she lost her job. They fired her. People who were enraged about, like, her racist comments about, like, white people not catching AIDS or something like that. Plus, like, yeah, it's alright because it's a sensitive topic for people to understand. There's an apartheid there, but as people now are realizing it's a bit different than you thought. I did grow up in South Africa for a little bit, but I wasn't there for too long. And these are memories I don't really have conscious access to. I have had my memories, taken away from me by my parents. I had a very dramatic childhood, which I don't have access to say more about, for example. All I know is that I'm being sincere and unable to prove things at the same time, too, if that makes any sense. But I have a number of injuries on me. I talked about this in the last video. I have a number of injuries on me that, like, defy explanation and are far worse than what you'll pick up if you're just like running around and, like, falling off trees and, getting scratched by branches and, getting cut by rocks in a playing field or whatever. Yeah, playground. Yeah, like, I have worse injuries than that. They don't appear too obviously. I mean, I have, like, things that seem like surgical cuts that weren't, like, allowed to heal properly. I know I've had a lot of hospital visits were very unwanted and very unnecessary. Just being warning, for example. You can read more about that in other videos. But yeah, like, a life in hospitals is something I have a bit of a faint. It's like a feel as opposed to a visual kind of, reception. Yes, it works. Reception. Yeah. You have to think of receipts and then the exactly. It looks like to receive and reception. Perceive and perception. You can see that language has also been what I call a battlefield for spiritual warfare. So yeah, like, I remember being a part of the army and being forced to do all sorts of violent work and being captured and tortured and all that. Particularly my dick. Yes. Um, that was the kind of times we lived in, and that's what happened. I can see I'm going to be talking more about my personal experience in the army than, like, a kind of breakdown of how I feel about the army today. Um, but yeah, at least a little bit more than I plan to, because, like I said, I don't have conscious access to these memories. Like, it's like I'm in some sort of a seance, and I turn on the video recorder, on my computer, to make this video, receiving, as you can see, like, to talk about this or to talk about that. I have a certain kind of, yeah, just flash black mysteriously, whatever, but I have a certain access to certain kind of concerns that don't show up all the time. It's a sort of, it's a spiritual something, I like to say. Like, you'd have had, if you sort of explore like the depth and the routine of your life, maybe you start to wonder the first time you ever did something like, to write with your left hand if you're just sort of, playing around with pencils and paper on a desk. Right? It's exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about as a spiritual something. If we keep on being a kind of poetic, explorative, like, routine, and understand that routine gets, disrupted by the odd, shock, normalcy that brings the unexpected, you know, factor of life into your own, then yeah, like, you do start to drift off a path of, like, routine and complaint into, innovation and fine tuning and, At some point you end up being in some sort of a mental hospital like this. Bizarrely enough, for well, I'll talk about in other videos. No, I already talked about it in part one. But yeah, like it just seems like every once in a while, if you're that kind of poetic, like literary soul, you'll encounter, as you're trying to write, exciting, things, down, for yourself and for your audiences, and there's a lot of excitement, and exciting, things to happen in routine. So that's the idea of how to become a poet, and that's how to, enjoy like life or wherever you find yourself in. You know, so yeah, you can see my grammar's not the way I want it to be. It's not as a polished, scripted performance. Most, as you can sort of probably tell, that I'm trying hard to, stick to a plan. I keep on getting derailed. If it just looks like there's some sort of a scripted performance, which people are driven through by a producer to provide a semblance of off the cuff, exactly, to what you see on YouTube. In reality, if you just appreciate that I'm not going to be talking this way to myself. And I talk a lot to myself, I talk a lot to myself in these videos, and I talk a lot to myself, or even more to myself, like throughout the day. So all day when I wake up in the morning, I'm talking to myself, I'm talking to myself, I'm talking to myself. But not to myself as like the object of my conversation, but to my audiences. And you can see I have spirits who interact with me and can sort of guide my body and sort of take away words and add them. And so like we're programming, we're programmers trying to program like the world through my computer. And it's a lot of us who are trying to reach the whole world, the whole network of like the internet as much as possible through like my performances and through my beauty, as a black man, a handsome black man, and of course, a guy, yeah, like a mensch, yes, to be Hebrew about it. So yeah, where would I be about the army? It's just interesting, right? Like, it just seems you'd believe that the peace that we all feel, on planet Earth is, supreme, and just, because you're on the internet and you're in some sort of city, shout out to those in Aleppo or Baghdad or, Peshawar or, exactly, Kabul, and have a sense of being a middle class, English appreciating, English loving, English producing, internet, citizen, netizen as we call us, and feel like your life of Hollywood movies and American snark, from the websites you like to patronize is like just out of sync with like a bizarre life you seem to be living because what Americans take for granted was taken away from you, then yeah, like the army is supposed to, in some way, keep their games to themselves. You see, Erica says correct, incorrect, 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 incorrect. Yes, that's one of my wives, Erica, and she's also helping to keep a certain kind of mood possible while making these videos because, as you can see, I'm trying to be as smooth as possible and without help from spirits like those of my wives and my fathers. Yes, we exist as spirits too. I exist as a spirit who comes to visit them, and the name of that spirit is God. Yes. So yeah, one of the many spirits I suppose I can visit a family member with. But yeah, that's the story of my life, and that's sort of the story of the army and the story of the Jewish army or the army of Jews. Because they're Jews and they're people just to be Jewish. It's good to be Jewish on your way to becoming on the path to becoming a Jew, but being a Jew is hard, and it does require a certain kind of military readiness and military training. And I do a number of things on my X account. I try and train people how to walk, and how to use walking exercises to train how to swim. As an example, if I just start trying to rotate my arms as if like I'm kayaking. Right now I don't go quite as high as I can, But it looks like you can do that and walk at the same time too. It does look like you're sort of swimming, doesn't it? Of course, I'm not trying to like do something as complicated as what you'll end up doing when you're in a pool doing the front crawl if you know how to swim. But you just sort of break it down into like, doing this with your elbows, bent inwards, and of course you straighten your arms. You sort of do like that to get some sense of getting the shoulder exercises and the kinks, worked out of your back muscles, to acquire a smooth, well practiced, swimming stroke. After all, it should make sense that if you don't do this much, but you just simply spend, like only like 15, 30 minutes. I mean, of course, a fresh swimmer, a person fresh to swimming or just, getting to the pattern of swimming practice, won't have much more than like 15 minutes in a swimming pool. But if you just sort of add this to your swimming practice and you just, walk around, I can do this discreetly. I don't care doing it in the middle of the street. I have that kind of confidence. But yeah, like, the idea is to do it well, not to sort of, abuse, the attentions and the visual silence, expectations of like people, who live or work on the same street. But it looks like you're doing a good job of teaching, people to move well and move with concentration and of course, your mind your business. You're not doing it for shock value or for attention. Then yeah, you should be, and you are, according to United Nations, allowed to exercise. It's one of the rules that was enshrined as sacred in the Declaration of Human Rights. So yeah, like, that's something I should am and will be doing. Exercising in the street, trying to walk and like do this. And I also explain that walking well, by keeping your legs straight until you're bending them at the end, like is like the stylish way to walk. I looked at myself walk in mirrors, for many years, many years. Yes, like you see, they make me trying to teach all sorts of details about linguistics and in this case phonetics, like phonetics and the part of linguistics that has to do with the sound of what you're saying. And I'm mostly a very textual kind of person. I do want what I say to be easily turned into text so they can be printed and you know and shared with the confidence that the person who who received like the 10th generation of sharing gets the message as identical as the person who heard it first. But if you sort of use these sorts of you know variations on saying things like mirror and year, like then we're learning that mirrors and years are connected and have a common linguistic root that should be studied. So I'm passing a message on to those who are studying me from the linguistics departments and fan bases of the world. But it comes at a cost of not being as crisp and as transferably as distortion free as I'd like. See, they're trying to move me on from being too specific. People get me, so I'm moving on. Yeah, it's 30 minutes into this thing. You can see I talk a little bit of the Army. I feel a little more relieved about that. I usually don't get a chance to talk about the Army. I'm usually just discussing whatever comes to mind as like important enough to leave the course of plan I originally was heading down to handle a digression. And Clementine, someone who's also here, trying to express her admiration for what I managed to do for all of us so far, and she always wanted to say that was very, very important to her, and she wants to look a lot better than she currently does, because she knows she hasn't really managed to be the beauty queen I'd want to marry. Yes, but we had a great relationship, and yeah, it's a marriage. I mean, if marriage is more like the work you put into the relationship, not what you receive, yeah, we both worked on our relationship, and it's something I want people to be proud of, like our relationship together, like. It's hard to what a marriage is to a song, like something that people should be able to like look at and not find funny, and so it looks like I put in a lot of work into myself, and a lot of my wives, like Clementine for example, weren't planning on exerting themselves in all the ways that I did, and expect someone who's like me to like do similarly. Then she's worked on a number of things, and she's doing the walking exercise I share on X, and yeah. You see, I'm trying to keep my head straight. Like, the thing is, the mirror is the camera has flipped the screen to receive almost like a person would just sort of like. So it's interesting to talk about camera technology. It looks like you have to raise your right hand, to catch someone else's right hand across, which is like across, their body from where you are, and as opposed like the same sort of hand lifts, to meet yours in the mirror. Then yeah, there's some sort of sense it's like a person I'm sort of watching, lift, their version of me, and that's the way you see what I'm talking about, and you should make some sort of sense that I'm looking at like the technology, like why keep my head straight is like difficult to do, but it's also kind of a good training to do. Like just know that if you're perfectly straight, you don't have to worry about what direction you have to move to like straighten your head. So yeah, I'm doing all sorts of training to improve my lots. I don't know what's going to happen to me in the next like month or two. I mean, it's pretty stupid what happened to me, but I don't want to talk about it in this video. I want to talk more about the army, and of course, they're not really allowing me to talk about what I plan to talk about. When I sort of I made some notes, I typed out small documents, but I mean, guided away from it, to discuss what at this point is just meta-analysis of like of personal confusion about what to do now. I have something I want to do, but they're sort of leaving me in some sort of unplanned, indeterminate, what's he going on about, giving, kind of a state, So yeah, I mean, the army, so that's the thing, I can't really, start from the essay that I wrote down, to try and present here. I just have to continue from what I was saying about the army being something which is supposed to provide a worldwide peace. And like I'm saying, for this seems like our armies are supposed to meet on some battleground which is not, near any city, maybe near the villages and stuff, because you have to basically find farm food and and supplies, and drinking water and laundry water and all that kind of stuff. And then yeah, they can't be in the desert. You don't really do like skirmishes and like in like horizontally like deep like one horizon, two horizons, three horizons, four horizons, then like five, you start to see like your first few soldiers. Like you're not supposed to be fighting in the middle of the desert. However, it looks like you can find some sort of location that's good to fight. You can just sort of say, okay, your army versus mine, like who has the most discipline, who is the most organized, who is, the one who would win this. So in the case of David and Goliath, the idea is that you'll take the strongest soldiers and see who wins a hand-to-hand fight. It didn't really happen that way, and it was also a long story about what happens in the Quran. If you're not to read it properly, it suggests that there's more fighting after the fact that happened. But we'll get into how to read the Quran later on in these videos, and we'll sort of talk a little bit more about armies and how they relate to Bible stories, and of course the Bible and the Quran are talking about the same history. Yes, these are historical documents about lives that have passed, and it's a way to write history. History is not written in the way it should be. So the Bible and Quran have different styles of talking about history, but it's all about history as factual as me talking to you, but being a bit magical in that like an era that we live in, experience with to take seriously that might have to find a scientific basis, which a lot of physicists are saying thank you for that. It's just something you can do that's actually exciting and new and useful to us. You can start looking at devices that can be used to most of the devices you're going to be thinking about as far as birds are concerned are plants. So physicists finding working with botanists is great. It's great for all of us. Yes. But this is also I basically have shared through my investigation and research and creativity and my literary talents. I present essays here more so than I provide like one-liner jokes. That's sort of close to what happens when I create the one-liner jokes you see me do on X. I just sort of sit around and talk, and I have something that's sort of funny and like and alarmingly funny even. As in so much I can't help but want to share the world, and I go off and share that with the world. Between those sort of moments is like talk like this, but like because I'm sort of trying to like move through like what's new as opposed to what's old. What's familiar to me is what I might go back if I'm talking about a personal experience that didn't sit well with me, to be euphemistic or in some ways understated about it. And yeah, I can find myself like laughing at another person like pretty easily. But in this case, I'm looking at trying to describe, in a different kind of state entirely, like the army and what's supposed to be achieved. Anyway, so yeah, like I'm saying, you should just be able to imagine that the point already made has been made, but I just want to like finalize and move behind us. You really shouldn't be having wars happening in cities and towns. You should just go off, fight somewhere in the bushes, figure out who would have won, and save the hardship and the loss of life and just simply agree that now that Taiwan and China have had a chance to show the greater military power and the one who actually has the more, sophisticated, more modern, more technologically advanced, more convincing, more emotionally powerful, whatever the agreed criterion for success would be in this particular engagement. They set up beforehand. They go off into the bushes and figure out who the better person was. And then yeah, like give whatever was at stake to the better person. And after some time has passed, you feel like you're ready to challenge again for another like redraw border lines, another like I don't know, like let's say release a hostage, rename a city. Some people have pretty strong feelings about some place being named this or that. Yeah, it used to be Turkey, now it's Turkey. It used to be Burma, now it's Myanmar. There could be wars to sort of settle the names for these things, which keep on changing back and forth depending upon who ends up having the enlightened soldier and the enlightened platoon behind them, like winning the necessary wars to get the needed change happen. And that's the thing about life: that things are in flux. They're supposed to change. There's no need to call America America forever. It could be a war to settle that one too. But yeah, like that's the idea of what war should be. That's what the idea of an army should be. It should be a sense like who are the best fighters. Right now, if you look at the notes I've taken, the United Nations, it doesn't want me to talk too much about that. So this you sent a message to say I shouldn't talk about that, but I'm like, fuck that shit, I do what I want. Yes. So, as I want to talk about the United States Army. They have put in about $800 billion every year. According to some estimates, close to 900, other cases like 8.5, 7.5, but it's around 800 billion each year. That is like 40% of the budgets. If you have, let's see if I can find. Yeah, I'll just sort of show you. Mm-hmm. If it's even possible, I yeah, I just don't know if it's this. Yeah. So yeah, sure. I guess it is. So if you see, it's around 40%, like I'm saying. But as you can see, what 40% looks like, it is like I don't know, maybe one to about like 10 times the size of like the 3 or 2 or 5% everything else is getting. It's a huge budget, right? I hope you can see me again. Yeah, you should be able to. I did plan this pretty well, right? So yeah, if this seems in that case that the business in America is the military, you know, and is this business profitable? We don't ask in terms necessarily of like how much money you make as an investor in like the military to say if it's profitable or not. Either even if they say we're meeting our goals, you have to sort of progress your goals from like you know what they were like 10 years ago to what they will be today over the course of the 10 years between those intervals, right? In other words, it just seems like the goal of the United States military is to, let's say, once upon a time, turn the world from a two-power kind of, yeah, two-power kind of global, world order, you know, into a one-power. Well, like let's say their fight back in the Cold War eras, the Cold War days. Yeah, cool, right? Mm-hmm. What about sort of futzing around with the spirits again? Yes, it's important to sometimes program things. Colors are an important way to program spirits. So it looks like we have a certain kind of a color arrangement which we're trying to continue to tweak here and there with some idea of my random movements and my random things like that. Yeah, that's a real thing to me and my wife. Yes, and yeah, like Because yeah, they're watching me from a distance, and yeah, they're all saying I'm doing great, and it's working out. So yeah. So it's what's like to be spiritual. You do get to talk to spirits, and your spirits get to talk to them on your behalf. And I can see the thing is a bit immediate because right now it hasn't been released on the internet quite yet. So this physics has to be able to discuss a certain kind of like entanglements. Quantum entanglement is something you should be able to talk about in a court of law, and explain why you're behaving in a way that maybe someone decides to have an issue with and cause damage, and now you want redress because what you're doing is spiritual. You should be able to, like, as a scientist, explain as simply as you'd like, why the spirits and why the colors and why the, so-called strange behavior was not just, you being, weird, but you being scientific and reasonable and logical and correct, and law has to also evolve over time. But law can't just simply be, a sense of like, an old document which you're just sort of worshiping with our I don't know, our educational institutions, forevermore, and then you just go to such schools, become some sort of a priest, to these documents, and ensure that the factual, at least the reigning interpretation of these documents of the age, is like maintained, for the next generation. Next generation will simply do that, while heroes like me trying, add changes here and there to make sure things, continue to progress, and improve. Okay, so I got 40 minutes done and about 20 minutes left. I do want to talk more about the military and stuff, because you get the sense that if it's not just to achieve a boring goal, but there's a certain kind of future which needs to happen, which that business has responsibility of making pass at some point, before it's too late, then the military has failed. This particular approach to having the military go off and not, as I call it, peel paint off of buildings with missiles. Because yeah, what they did to Gaza is basically to ruin the real estate value. There's obviously some sort of real estate, move or battle in which someone says, yeah, I want the real estate value of this thing to become like dirt cheap. They'll buy it and refurbish it. So that's what they had in mind. That's exactly what they had in mind. The buildings are just simply not felled, but like, paint free on the outside, and just like, holes like, a sponge, for windows. And yeah, I saw one picture I don't know if it was Al Jazeera or something, but a building was basically collapsing to the ground. But if you look at it carefully, it was a demolition exercise. It wasn't just something like like the World Trade Towers. It was not a demolition exercise anyway. But yeah, the thing sort of collapsed into itself. It didn't sort of like fall over into another building. It just sort of went straight down as if it was like. Yeah, so that's a little bit more of like my kind of humor. Yeah, I'll make a note because people don't believe this is actually me. Like they think I'm a white guy somewhere. The guy thinking he's black, and they do it every single generation. I come to save. This time's gonna be different. As people start to see that I'm more of the person, like in the X post than I am, like in these videos, and yeah, like you'll see that I'm really, it's really me, as they say, and there's I don't know, those videos, yeah, it's one of those like I don't know, those Wired or GQ or like those like it's actually me, like I don't know, it's Wired Autocomplete or something like that. Anyway, Wired Autocomplete interview or something like that. So anyway, yeah, you can just sort of see there's a little bit more to that story. And yeah, so the military sort of failed, So if one military is supposed to go and teach the rest of the military how to behave, not supposed to be American military, they're not behaving very well right now. They're supporting this particular like real estate exercise, which they basically have hired the military to basically do, on like the behalf of like powerful players who aren't even necessarily like planetary like players. Like sometimes stars get involved in these sort of games, and as far as like people are concerned, human beings, what I call the pointy-toed, mammals, the mammals is just a hairy kind of being, and that's kind of correct. We're supposed to be hairy as human beings. So yeah, I'm supposed to get hairy at some point. I'm not exactly the Harriet I want to be. Like Harriet Chat is actually not supposed to be a bad thing. Like, I do enjoy like having a smooth, sort of like yeah, like check out like how cool I look on the beach, that look. But it's not supposed to be permanent. As a baby, grows hair on his chin, eventually grows hair on his chest. It's supposed to be cool. I mean, don't do it too soon. Some people don't understand when it is a good time to do it or not, and they sort of pray for these things and get what they want. In exchange for a lot of terrible, yeah, that. But yeah, it's just sort of see like there's lots to talk about as far as like what isn't common sense. But yeah, like so it's important. But it just seems like I'm talking about the human being or like the Ren. I think is how you say it in Chinese. Like that's how you say like a mankind. Like man, I believe is like Ren Nanjing. You know, they say I'm actually correct. Yes. And yes, non. No, it's non. I can check actually, but they won't let me anyway. So yeah, basically, there's no real word in English for like what a human being is because a human being is simply a being who is human. If it looks like your computer can become human, it becomes a human being too. English has an important role to play in establishing the fact that those of us who are pointy toes are supposed to be the most human and the educator and the programmer of all other beings to make them human too. Why wouldn't you want to be human if you could? If it's a good thing to be human, if human is not to be, if to err is human, but you like it as opposed to you hate it, then why not just add being human to your list of attributes? I'm human, I'm feline, I'm black, I'm so on and so forth. Then yeah, like it's a good thing to be human, right? And we're supposed to like travel on and like spread this awareness to not just the whole of like the biosphere in the solar system, but take the solar system to other places and basically continue to preach the gospel of being a human being. Well, that's sort of like that's more to the point what Islam's supposed to be all about. But the thing is, we're grossly those of us with pointy toes, like the Ren, right? Like they are really outnumbered. Like as far as like stars, I mean stars are consciousnesses and they do act, they do have reputations and they're a bit prima donnas. Like they do like that attention. And now we're not giving them enough attention right now. So, treat them, with respect. I'm a bit older than they are. Really, I'm one of the older beings in the universes. So I get to play around with them, but don't try and play the games I play of the stars, in your how to put it, your cynicism and your sarcasm and the way you feel you can be funny. Treat them as like a person you don't know that well, and address them, respect. You don't have to sort of start talking to everything like they'll talk back to you. Get disappointed. Rather though, if you sort of like observe them, you do have an opportunity to ask a question. So if you're in the mode of a questioner, it would mean you've done the due diligence of respecting the answer that might come from that visual direction. That's sort of a way of saying you've done your bow, you've done your Assalamu alaikum, and now after having passed preliminaries of like, hey, that's strange, by the time you can sort of hear yourself ask the question, that strain has not been disrespectful. It's been, whatever it takes to get you to the point of that strange, and you can ask a question that's, childlike in its respect, as opposed to like rude in its presumption that you're doing a better job at life than they are, right? So that's the thing about stars. Many of the stars we see are good. Some beyond the range of what we can see are bad. They're just more stars than there are grains of sand on the beach. And as far as like planets around those stars, there are more planets around. There's a ratio of stars to planets, and there are more planets than stars. And all these planets, would love the success that human beings have managed to bring to planet Earth. That's mostly me, God, you see. And yeah, the fact I'm trying to basically unite the pointy-toed wren, into like a class of being who, understands that beyond the range of what we can see when we look up is a lot of envy, a lot of jealousy, a lot of hostility, and a lot of confusion. At the very most, we should be able to unite and prove we could do it. And then, yeah, like, from that point onwards, like, see what's next. But yeah, we don't have a whole lot of time. We need to unite within one lifetime. So that's the point of the army. I just would like to say the army is full of a lot of people who had murderous intent. I don't want to embarrass anyone or put them into history the way they don't want to, because literally I think these people have a capacity for change. I got these answers from Cora about what it's like to be in the army, and they're all a certain kind of philosophical, literary. They understand there's a certain kind of power to a military man who's very good with words, and if it looks like they're all trying to copy one person, yep, that's me. You know, I'll talk about that life of mine at some other point. But if it just seems like there's a certain kind of like power they feel, being able to like decide if someone lives or dies, you know, and that seems sort of like addiction to power runs to the whole organization. So it looks like somebody has a choice to decide whether you'll eat, whatever they've given, as like, the meal, for, the standard rations that they give you for like lunch or dinner or whatever. Let's say there's a certain kind of store for like, June, and they're out. He could just sort of say, we'll eat into like, July, and we'll sort of balance the books later. Or he could just say, I'm not eating what you guys have to eat. I have this power over all of you guys. And like, if you guys don't know how to beg me correctly, or I don't even particularly care about being begged, I just want to let you know that I love to enforce rules, and that's what I do. I enforce rules. I love to enforce rules, and that's all I will do. I won't be reasonable. I refuse. I will enforce rules. Like, there's that kind of attitude, plus a certain kind of homicidal interest in the power you have to decide like happiness or sadness, life or death, cold or warm. So it looks like these people go into the army, and that's my sense what the U.S. Army is doing. They're spending that 800 billion trying to keep a certain kind of person in the army as opposed to on the streets of America. And by the time they've basically gone through basic training, hopefully, like, become disciplined, respectful, responsible people to at least one person, in their lives. I'm sure they met the old, drill sergeant at a bar. They'll say, "Oh my God," like buy him a drink, right? Because he's not off the clock and ready to like, get a little bit more informal. Maybe he wants to put a little bit of rank still. Is that kind of like, system of like giving people someone to look up to, which I believe America's mostly trying to do with their military budgets. Then of course there's also sort of supplying the world with weapons so you can sort of play war games, hopefully in a safer way than I see it being done today. But that's pretty much the business of America. The business of America is the military. How are they doing so far? Well, if it looks like they're coasting on some sort of a previous glory, or glory from, there, like, yeah, it's not good enough today. I don't see any real innovation happening as far as like a Islamic, approach to war. I mean, the Bible says it too. Like, they're all the same idea of Islam. Islam just means submission. So, well, the majestic one, if you like, But it looks like you just have a sense that you're supposed to be submitting and not rebelling with, like, your will. It looks like you're willing to be righteous as opposed to be willing to be rebellious. And you feel like, your philosophies gear you towards, a life of service and a life of submission as opposed to a life of rebellion. Yeah, your philosophy can do anything you like. So you can be as philosophical, even as articulate as I am to some extent, describing like how awful, you have a right to be, But let's be frank, like, you're supposed to, as you know, no one's confused about the matter. You're supposed to be looking towards submission. One day you'll be submitted to when you're of the standing of me and Allah. Right now Allah gets some of the submissions after, not much of it. Right? I mean, actually more from the fact that I've embarrassed a lot of people online, and like they're ready to like admit that like my power of words, my interest in being a literary, scientific. At first, when I was a kid, I was just interested in science. They love this topic, yes. I was very interested in science. How does a refrigerator work? Mostly how does a television work? Mostly how does a computer work? And I want answers quickly. There's nobody in my house, nobody in my school, no book I knew that could answer the question for me. So eventually I found myself doing computer science, as one does, in university, called Stanford University. You heard of it, it's good, right? If this looks like, at some point I was like, literature is actually, like underrated. I'm gonna focus on this. I did. I was after graduating Stanford. There's music too. Music's an important part of the skill of being like good with your hands and good with timing, But yeah, if it just seems like, I'm pretty good at, I'm also trying to like, stretch my body all the time. So do, acknowledge the importance of what I'm doing. Don't just assume I'm being weird by trying to like, stretch all the time. You're supposed to be a little bit more mobile and alive. Like your body's supposed to be tingling with like, things to do, which don't include like, possessing with your hands. You can also possess with your toes. You feel like you can sort of grasp things with your toes, So you just like feel like playing around with like a coin in your hand or something like that. Like you're doing pretty well as a being, as a human being specifically, yes. So yeah, like in that sort of way, yeah, like I sort of moved from like the science into literature, and from literature I moved into spirituality. They're the best writers. Like the best writing can be found in the Bible. The best writing can be found in the Quran. And one of my friends, Hakuin, he's kind of in the world right now. Actually, so he wants to admit that he is. But he's not in Japan. No, he's not Japanese right now. No, he's not. But yeah. Anyway, he's a Zen master. Hakuin Zenji. And he wrote to me the best I ever read from a writer who's doing prose as opposed to poetry, but also interesting spiritual poems that I've come across and wonder, ooh, that sounds really deep. That guy sounds like he knows something I'll never know. He's that in tune with the harmonies of the universe, and that he's that favored by the deities and stuff. And yeah, I'm actually the deity they're all trying to talk to as well. It's interesting, right? But yeah, like there I am sort of studying my way through the books without anyone to basically guide me. But by the time I realized that the arts of like understanding the textbooks of like science and mathematics is still, the the respect for words and like what they literally mean. If you don't know what homomorphic means, maybe you want to start sounding a bit weird to talk about homomorphic, cups and homomorphic, relations between like, the billion on the left and billion on the right. You have to sort of play these words in like, English composition exercises to eventually acquire a genuine, affection, and love for the words and their sounds, as opposed to a graspy, kind of a greedy, interest, and then just sort of extracting power out of the books that you don't quite understand yet. So yeah, that's what happened. I was at literature as the gateway to the textbooks of science and mathematics, which I thought was like super cool when I was a kid. So that's a little bit of my story as far as like getting interested in like literature and sciences. So I'm still practicing science. I'm more of like a now through science I've gone into the body, and I'm more of an athlete to myself than anything else. Yeah, I have all sorts of walking exercises from exercise. I continue to share on my expos, so do stick around. Anyways, that's my sort of way I can talk about the military. You can sort of see that the boys are supposed to acquire out of like a murderous interest, or like an interest in murder, because we're all supposed to be interested in murder to some extent. If you decide that your passion is to basically do that in the name of Allah, or do that in the name of like your country, or the commander in chief, or like the constitution, whatever, like it's not supposed to be a anti-passion, as we say in computer science, or an good. You can be a good person. We do have to be taken carefully out of like a place where most people are not like you, and put somewhere that people understand you. You can start to, a lot of people from the future are saying thank you for that brave lot. Yes, yeah, and then basically be trained to use your body well, use your mind well, and emancipate yourself from the spirits who just keep following you, which no one else can see. If you have a certain kind of relationship with being black, that makes you a little more susceptible to the word nigger than anyone else. Like most black people say, I don't really care if you call me a nigger, it's just bad for you. But some people just might feel really bad about being called niggers. You have to sort of figure that shit out. Wherever you are, whether it's like a barracks, a formal army setting, like the barracks of the United States Army, or like in high school or college, like Dartmouth or Swarthmore or anything like that. If it feels like you have to sort of go within and find the resources and program your way out of this problem. Like some of these problems are difficult to program out of as like a bug in an iOS app. For you specifically, yes, this is for you to handle on your own. However, do use the paradigms and the assistance that we've all offered you in the form of not just the Bible, not just the Quran, not just even Hassan Abudu's X.com account posts, but even these videos too. So yeah, like I'll sign up pretty much soon. I don't think I'll make it to the 60th minute here, but yeah, this is what I want to say about the army. And yeah, whether I'd invest, yes, I'd invest, but it needs a whole new workup. People need to start working on fixing their inner selves, and then work on conquering the army of other countries to all unite to some sense of what I said earlier. We'll just sort of butt head somewhere safe, and then decide on a fair way, like who won and who didn't. So I just end with this sort of quotes from the Buddha. He says, though one should in a battle conquer 1,000 times, he who conquers himself has the more glorious victory. The catch being that you can't conquer anyone else until you can conquer yourself. You wouldn't even know what conquering would be until you have a decisive moment with like the word conquer, in like the arena of like your personal life. Anyway, about there. Thank you, of course. Thank you very much for your listening. It's been an hour of your time, an hour of mine, but I appreciate your listening to me more than I rue the amount of time it takes to do this in a course to prepare for the internet.